Hi guys, Galactic Gaming here. I know it's been a while, I just had to take care of quite a few things back at home, but I'm back now for the most part. So let me get started on what I was going to show you before I took my unfortunate break, and that was my Reroute Reserves to Beam Overload build, aka what happens when I dump pure caffeine into the phaser arrays. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, don't feel bad. This is just basically a beam overload build with as much weapons haste on it as possible. To help those out that have no idea what weapons haste is basically how fast your energy weapons will fire and recharge. The more weapons haste you have there, the faster they'll recharge and fire off. You usually want as much weapons haste as you can possibly get on a beam overload build, but you usually don't want so much that you're going to be cutting into your bonus damage and Cat 1 damage bonuses. But I'm crazy. I like taking things to the extreme. I mean, if you want any more proof of that, just literally look at any other of my videos. Okay, now that I've explained to you what weapons haste is, let's take a look at the build. This is just going to be a regular beam overload build, as much weapons haste as possible. So for my weapons, I'm just going to have what I usually have on a forward-facing beam overload build, which is going to be the Terran Task Force Phaser Beam Array, because it's the most powerful Phaser Beam Array in the game. It quite consistently outperforms certain dual beam banks. You can really just use whatever dual beam bank you want. I'm just using the Agony Phaser dual beam bank and the Federation 32nd Century refit dual beam bank, because those are the only ones I've had correctly re-engineered and upgraded to Mark 15 epic quality. I've also got the Phaser wide angle dual heavy beam bank from the Discovery reputation, because this is a really hard hitting dual beam bank. And I've just got a quantum torpedo here. Oh wait, I did not mean to slot the wide angle quantum torpedo, but oh well, it's already there now. So I just use whatever torpedo you want here. You could even use a Maelstrom if you really wanted. I just like to look at quantum torpedoes, but again, I slotted the wrong one. For my core gear, I'm just using the regular, what I usually use, so that's the Elite Fleet Intervention Protomatter Deflector Array for the crit chance and crit severity, the prevailing innovative impulse engines from the competitive reputation for the massive amount of speed you get when I activate a weapons firing mode, and I'm using the Discovery Warp Core and the Shield A for its 2-piece, which gives me plus 120% bonus hull regeneration. And the second reason is because the Tilly Shield actually gives me 11.5 increased damage for 10 seconds whenever I attack an enemy shield. And in my aft weapons, I'm just using whatever Omnis I had, which in this case is the 32nd Century Federation Phaser Beam Array and the Omnidirectional Parvin Proton Beam Array. Now, this may seem like an odd choice, considering that this beam array does function best when it's under fire at will. However, well, I have a little trick for you using on beam overload builds that allows me to actually have this beam array keep using fire at will, even when literally every single one of my other weapons is using beam overload, and I'll explain that to you later. And for the experimental weapons, I did consider using Soliton Wave Impeller, but in the end I just decided to use the Gold-type Psionic Resonator because it's a very powerful experimental weapon. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's the second most powerful after the Plasma Incendiary Bombardment Warhead, and that is something I do not have yet. For my devices, first I've got the large auxiliary batteries to feed into the Fleet Power Network Array, Advanced Energy Amplifiers to the bonus energy weapon damage and shield penetration, the Kobayashi Maru transport for the random buffs I can get, the flagship distress frequency transponder because an Odyssey class on the field is always a good thing, and Deuterium surplus in case I need to get somewhere quickly and I do not have evasive maneuvers back up yet. In my Universal and Engineering consoles, I've just got a whole bunch of phaser ISO mags. It should be kind of obvious whenever you're doing an energy weapon build, you kind of want to be using ISO mags on pretty much everything. In my science consoles, first I've got the Domino from the Bajoran Intercept, which comes from the Phoenix Prize Store. And this just gives me 25% firing cycle haste and 25 bonus hull damage, as well as some recharge to my torpedoes and bridge officers, which isn't really needed. This usually only lasts for 10 seconds, however, if you defeat a foe, you can add 2 seconds back onto that duration, which can occur 10 times. So this console can actually last up to 30 seconds. Next, we've got the Fleet Power Network Array from the Awani Command Carrier. This just gives, I think this is tied for the biggest haste console that you can get after the Troyes console, and I'll explain why I didn't use that in this build later on. but this just gives me up from anywhere between 15 to 125% firing cycle haste, and I can also just get beam overload 1, counter rapid fire 1, or torpedo high yield salvo 1, which would be useful if I actually needed that. Next, I've got the M6 computer from the Tier 3 Perseus escort, and this just does pretty much whatever the Domino does, but in a lighter version. So it's 15 bonus ore damage, 20% firing cycle haste, 25% cooldown reduction on tactical bridge officer abilities, and some accuracy and defense rating. And then we've got the flagship tactical computer, which comes from medieval flagships. So that's any of the scimitars, the Odysseys, the Borderskews, and any of their legendary counterparts. And this just gives me 33% firing cycle haste for me and my whole team, as well as some turn rate and flight speed. However, there is a caveat with this console. Once you've activated it, it can't be activated for another 60 seconds, so you need kind of a bit of a coordination with your team there. In my tactical consoles, first I've got Enhanced Plasma Manifold from the Tier 1 Oberth. Now, listen up. This is to buff Fleet Power Network Array, because crafting auxiliary batteries can get pretty exhausting at times, so I want to save on as many of those as possible. Next I've got the DPRM from the the Atlas Prototype Dreadnought. This is just for survivability, and bonus ore damage is nice. Next I've got Timeline Stabilizer, which is from the Crenham Science Vessel, and this just gives me a whole bunch of firing cycle haste and recharge times. And this also has a 2-piece set with the flagship tactical computer, since they're part of the same set, the flagship technology set. So this is just going to give me an extra bunch of crit chance and flight turn rate, which is always helpful. Next I've got the Palmer and Crystal Battery, which just gives me a passive 8% firing cycle haste for energy weapons, and also gives me a rather large amount of proton damage, which will help with the resonant shock proc on the Palmer proton beam array. And lastly, I've got experimental power redirection from the Excelsior 2, and this is just here just because firing beams all over the place is kind of the point of this build, so there's no sense in not using this console. For my Captain Specializations, first I've done something a little different. I've gone with Temporal Operative Primary to gain access to temporal cross-wiring, activating an exotic damage ability, which just give you 4% firing cycle haste for energy weapons for 10 seconds, and that will proc off of most of my temporal abilities, so that's pretty handy. And I've just gone with Miracle Worker Secondary for the extra hull regeneration. That's always helpful. For my personal space traits, first I've got Superior Beam Training for the bonus beam weapon damage, Symbiotic Ice for the extra amount of cold damage from my beam weapons, the Boimler Effect to help with my cooldown management, Fleet Coordinator for the bonus damage per team member, Intelligence Agent Attaché, which reduces the recharge of my captain's abilities whenever I get a critical hit. Now here's a weird one. Rogue Scientist on board, and I'm using this one mainly for emergency power to shields, which will trigger 2 starship traits that I'll talk about shortly, which gives me more weapons haste. Then I've got Adaptive Offense for the crit chance becomes crit severity, Terran Targeting Systems for the straight up crit severity, a good day to die so I can use go down fighting whenever I want, and Unconventional Systems to reduce the recharge time of my Universal Consoles and overactivate a control ability. For my Starship traits, first I've got a Super Weapon Ingenuity, which is the extension trait for Beam Overload, which allows me to keep it up pretty much 100% of the time. Next, I've got Flagship Staffing. This is one of the abilities that I was talking about with Rogue Scientist aboard. Command and Healing Powers will reset firing mode and grant weapons haste. That will trigger off of emergency power to shields. However, and this is also true of the weapons hop deflectors to fall down here, it will also trigger with the emergency power to shields that Rogue Scientist board gives me. However, there won't be any cooldowns like you would usually get. So if I was to activate emergency power to shields, I would get the associated cooldowns. However, when it's activated by a Rogue Scientist board, I don't get the cooldowns, which is handy. Next I got Vanguard Specialist to improve the duration and recharge time of recursive shearing, which usually just hits like a truck. Next I've got Temporal Tunneling. Whenever I activate a Temporal Bridge Officer ability or an exotic damage ability, I get 100% firing cycle haste for 5 seconds, which is neat. Emergency Weapon Cycle is pretty much on every single energy weapon build, which just gives me 20% firing cycle haste whenever I activate emergency powered weapons. Preferential targeting. This, whenever I activate beam fire at will or cannon scatter volley, I give 100% damage to beam overload and cannon rapid fire. This is why I've got cannon scatter volley on the build, and as you'll notice, whenever I activate that, I get fire at will 1 on the Parse proton beam array. However, when I activate beam overload, I still keep fire at will 1 on the beam array, but I get overload 3 on literally any of my weapons, which is a neat trick. None of my space reputation traits really do anything for firing cycle haste, so I've just done what I usually do, which is advanced targeting systems for the extra crit severity, energy refrequencer for a bit of extra hull healing whenever I deal damage with my energy weapons, magnified firepower for the bonus weapon damage, precision for the extra crit chance, and tireless duality for the crit chance based on my hull capacity. In my active space reputations, I've got anti-time entanglement damn, that is a mouthful. Anti-time entanglement singularity, there we go, which just does a physical damage in an AoE. The biomolecular shield generator, which gives me a crap ton of shield regeneration and shield resistance, which is always handy for survival. Deploy sensor interference platform for when the shield generator can't hold up and I need something to take the threat away from me. Force challenge, so I can forcibly yoink back anybody who thinks they can run from me. And quantum singularity manipulation for just basically extra cloaking, which can get threat off me for a short duration. My bridge officer stations, I've just got viral impulse burst, electromagnetic pulse probe, Heisenberg amplifier, chronometric conversion field, jam sensors, and scramble sensors are all unconventional systems triggers. Heisenberg amplifier, chronometric conversion field, and recursive shearing 3 will also trigger temporal tunneling, as I believe also does electromagnetic pulse probe. In my universal seat, I've got emergency powered shields to trigger flagship staffing and speak of the devil, to trigger flagship staffing and weapons hot deflectors to full. In my tactical commander seat, I've got beam overload 3 because this is a beam overload build. Should probably have the best version of that I can possibly put on there. In my lieutenant tactical seat, I've got torpedo spread 1 to buff my quantum torpedo, and cannon scatter volley 1 to buff beam overload, and also to grant fire at will to the Parse proton beam array. In my ensign engineering seat, I've just got emergency powered weapons 1. And in my Lieutenant Commander Tactical seat, I've got Photonic Officer 2 to help my cooldowns. And in my duty officers, first I've got a Projectile Weapons Officer that just gives me extra crit severity on firing projectiles. 3 Energy Weapons Officers that gives me extra crit severity on firing energy weapons. 29 to 47, which gives me extra bonus, which gives me max power levels whenever, and a chance whenever I activate Side Spirits Officer abilities. And I've got a Warp Core Engineer, which can improve my power levels whenever I use any emergency power ability, which is always helpful. So now that I've shown you everything, let me take you through a Pug IC and then I'll show you the Parse. Stay tuned.
Scanning the nanite transformer. Done. Additional data is available. The nanite probes can repair the transformers. Stop them!
Your defensive capabilities are unable to withstand us. Lower your shields and await assimilation.
A probe is closing in on a transformer. Destroy it!
813k DPS. That is incredible considering I had to grab Stu into this run and he was doing nearly 800k in a pseudo tank. That guy's out of control. As we look into what I actually did, you can see that most of my damage was coming from the Discovery Dual Beambank, which is kind of to be expected. It's a very powerful dual beambank, followed very closely behind by the Terran Task Force Phaser Beam Array. I've said this multiple times, that weapon is busted. And then we've got the other two dual beambanks following after it, and then we've got the Gold type Psionic Resonator at 31k. Definitely don't regret putting that on. And then underneath that, Resonance Shock. That is a proc doing 26, nearly 27k. That is quite unbelievable. And then we've got the Omni Beam underneath that doing 20k, and then Recursive Shearing only doing 17k. It's kind of disappointing, but oh well. And then we've got Auxiliary Phaser Beam Array Overloaded Wheel 3. That's from the Experimental Power Redirection, doing nearly 13k. That's alright. And then we look down, and way down near the bottom, the Pardon Proton Beam Array only doing 1k with Fire at Wheel 3. I'm not unhappy about that. Most of the Pardon Proton Beam Arrays damage actually comes from the Resonance Shock, so I'm very happy about that. So, that was my Reroute Reserves to Beam Overload build. I hope you guys enjoyed what I came up for you lot, and once again, I must apologize for taking a break that long. I had to take care of some very important things back home and for myself. But I'm back now, so remember to like and subscribe if you like my content. It really does help, but I'd like to be able to get an extra source of money in someday. But yeah, remember to have a good day. I'll catch you later. Bye, people!